Hey guys, welcome back. BDCKR here. We're back with Season 7, Episode 8 of our weekly Q&A videos. A lot of letters that used to be in the name, they're not there anymore. There's some links in the description to just listen to this and not look at it on other platforms. That's what we in the business like to call a podcast. And you can check that out if you so choose. But if not, I mean, you're already here. And very few people actually listen to this on the podcast format. So I doubt we're getting a lot of conversions at any given episode, but right. You know, we mentioned it anyways because it's comfortable, we're used to it, stuck in our ways, and in a lot of ways just being left behind by the times, I would say. Strange energy to bring in the start here.
You're feeling punchy?
I'm feeling punchy today. I don't know, it's been a while
it's been trapped inside.
Trapped inside. It's sort of a weird cooped up energy, but we're here, and we've got some questions. And the first question comes from Ice Cream Sunshine U, and they say, why you guys stop playing Injustice 2 Mobile? I mean, why no content of Injustice 2 Mobile or IJ2 Mobile?
I guess a confluence of events, maybe?
Yeah.
One, it's not as good a game,
Mm-hmm.
I feel.
Yeah.
That when we first started playing, it felt like much more of a time sink.
Yeah.
And it required you to almost play it obsessively in order not to be dissatisfied with the game.
There's a lot of little stuff. I mean, there's a lot of content. Like you said, it's a lot of content, but it requires a lot of play. And a lot of stuff was kept the same, but the stuff that they updated seemed not as good. So, like, the stuff where you had to just basically come in and just swap stuff out, like the missions every once in a while.
Mm-hmm. The part where it rewards you for not playing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then the way that the gear was redone so that you didn't actually have an opportunity to mix and match.
Right, it was gear specific to those
So you
characters.
ended up having way less complexity. And I think, for us at least, in the late game, almost the entire fun of the game is a combination of mixing characters and mixing gear, right?
Right.
And it's making those teams and then testing out those teams and having those options. And when you have gear not mix and match,
right.
Then you all of a sudden lose a huge amount of complexity, which is weird too, because for the amount of work that they put into making all the gear for everybody, right? Just locking it down and actually making it significantly less flexible than last game, and I guess that was to make it closer to the way that it worked in the actual console game itself with the gear.
Is that how?
I think the console had it character specific gear, and they also had it would change their characters' aesthetic, so it was actually like physical like gear that showed up on the characters when they were fighting, I think.
Right.
Yeah. So you know, that choice, I can sort of see why they did it, but just for us, it made the game a lot less enjoyable. And then we also got banned.
Yeah, well, and so here's the thing, right? It's if we needed to, I think we could have just created a new account.
Yeah.
But it just didn't really feel like it was worth the effort.
Were we even using glitches?
No.
How did we get banned?
I really don't know, but then the support didn't respond to our email.
Yeah.
We actually kept track for a few weeks.
Yeah.
So we did have content for a while. And then all of that together with the fact that we were playing, we're spending too much time basically playing stuff, and something had to give. It was an easy decision to make, I think.
Yeah.
Despite the fact, I mean, if we were in it for the clicks and the views only,
Injustice 2 would probably be
it probably would have been better play to do it, but it still had to be fun. And Injustice has been enjoyable. It's surprisingly enjoyable for how long we've been playing.
And I guess just by lack of decision making and slow shift into other content, we've decided that the audience that we would like to keep and maintain are the people who like hearing about a very old mobile game and then a surprising amount about our political views for a channel about a mobile game. And to those people, we love and appreciate you, and we will continue making content right up your alley just because that's the only thing that we actually...
that's what we got.
That's what we find joy in making and find takes an appropriate amount of effort to make for us to be willing to keep doing it. And so for the people who like it, you know, we're glad you're here. And we will...
Yeah.
we're not gonna change this too much because we wouldn't know how and don't want to.
Yeah, that's true.
So yeah. Here we go. Next question comes from Gliso. And they say, hey guys, is there a fast way to get crit chance augments and crit damage augments?
Not really. The main source is Survivor.
Yeah.
And probably if you're going to make the most of it, you accumulate a few last laugh tickets and then use the airplane mode glitch.
It's so hard because with the number that you need to open to start getting good augments, it almost feels arbitrary, right?
Yeah, I mean, part of me feels like if I'm doing 5 tickets and I get at least one or the equivalent of one major crit augment, then I'm willing to keep it. Because there's just so many possibilities, right? Like you could get mine.
That's true.
3 levels, like the really crap, medium, and the really good.
Yeah.
And you can get it for any one of the
4 stats.
4
and
domains.
That's even if you get augments.
Right, because you might get a ha-ha-ha, or you might get a gear that you don't want.
That's true.
Or maybe you get a gear that you do want if you're still early on enough and you're trying to collect them. But for me, the sweet spot was just like 5. 10 was too much, and I'd be burning through... if you say 10, then you'd want to have more crit augments to make it worth it. And then you'd be burning through a bunch and you wouldn't...
And you'd also be resetting more. Yeah, so I guess... But when you say fast, the problem is... it depends on the definition of fast, and we're talking about the definition of the fastest that Injustice lets it be, which is still not particularly fast. So if you're coming at it from, a seasoned Injustice player's perspective, or there's a ton of grinding, that might be fast. If you're or from compared to the normal speed that you get them at, if you're coming at it from what most people mean by fast, there's just no way to get them fast because it is still pretty slow, and moderately tedious, at least for the reset part. Yeah. So there we go. Our next question comes from Trist, and they say, any tips on how to beat a metal team?
Yeah, don't fight them. That's how you beat them. I mean, I'm only being a little bit silly and facetious here. Because Elite 3 is when their passives can be improved, and then that's when they become really ridiculously powerful, especially Batman Ninja Catwoman.
Yeah.
Right? Like, if her passive only lets her have that boosted damage and the drain... There's a dog out there that's not that happy.
Yeah, they're a surprise cameo, though.
Special
guest dog. They'll be weighing in every once in a while. when they choose.
When you, because when you upgraded her passive completely, and she gets 21 seconds for every trigger. So for a tag in, or knocking out somebody, or doing your special 2, if it lasts for 21 seconds, you are done.
Yeah.
You are fighting her basically, like, fully powered all the time, the entire fight. So you need to really not be facing them if you are having trouble beating a metal team. That's what you need to do. Okay.
Next one comes from Apocalypse, and this is a reply to sort of what we've been talking about, just in terms of COVID-19 on and off, where they say U.S. President also said he's stopping payments to the World Health Organization for being more China-centered and for not warning about the virus earlier, even though he himself publicly called the virus a hoax started by the Democrats.
Yeah, so this is the ridiculous part to me, right? Like, no matter what party affiliation you've got, I don't know how you can ever say that the current president actually is presidential.
Yeah, and it's crazy too, because it's not even like this is the first time, and this is not going to be the last time that he's going to say something which is entirely inconsistent with his own previous statements. And it's just, he just says at any given moment seemingly whatever he feels like, regardless of how true it is, or regardless of what, like, it's so hard to even figure out what he believes, and he says it with such conviction that any given moment it feels like the thing that he's saying right now is the thing that he believes with all of his heart. And you have no way of untangling it. And I think it's wild that for somebody in office we've reached that point, but you almost just can't even, on the basis of any individual statement that he's making, it means absolutely nothing.
Right.
Because it could be something that he's saying for convenience at the moment. It could be something that an advisor has told him to say. It could be something that an advisor has told him to say and he's edited to make less politically correct for some reason.
Right.
And, looking for a motivation or a reason is just an exercise in frustration. And I think the problem is a lot of people can't afford to just ignore everything he says, because the stuff that he says does matter to a lot of people, and it impacts a lot of people.
Like Lysol.
Yeah. It's just...
Because Lysol...
where does that come from?
Is it ridiculous? Does it seem ridiculous to you that Lysol actually has to say, do not take any of their products internally?
But nobody told him to say that.
No, of course not, because
Nobody else would ever tell him to say that.
No, but they feel like they have to, because there's potentially
I know, but
even
I'm
a
saying,
small element of the population.
Who got Trump to say that? Like, it has to be from him. And
Yeah, well,
what's his motivation?
So this is just it, right? I mean, the problem really is you could try to reconcile it, find some sort of logical consistency to it, and I think you're going to be hard pressed to do that.
Yeah,
I don't think it's there to be found, and there's different reasons for saying different things at different times. They don't have to be the same reasons. And I mean, one thing that I've heard that rings sort of true is, really, you just throw it all out there, see what sticks, and at the end of the day, whatever sticks is you can tell people, yeah, it's not, I meant that all the time.
Yeah.
All that other stuff was a sarcasm or a joke or whatever. And the best is when he says something and all his people rush to defend him and interpret it in a way that makes sense. And then afterwards he says, I was just being sarcastic. I was just joking around. I didn't really mean it. So he's throwing his own people under the bus.
He's nearly unintelligible at this point.
Yeah.
There's not a coherence in narrative in just the things that come out of his mouth. It's never mind he and somebody else can't agree on a story. He can't stick to a story himself.
But I don't think that's ever the issue. The issue really is that by being president, he gives a lot of other people the opportunity to do things that they want to do.
Yeah.
And that's really what it comes down to.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we could go into the factual content of why this is just so ridiculous. I don't think it's worth the effort, because a lot of smarter people and better informed people than us have already done it.
Yeah.
But I think the point really just stands is, America, you are our neighbors. We like you a lot. Please do something about this. Whether it's voting in the Democrats or finding a different Republican to lead your party. Yeah. I think we really want you to get out of this funk.
It's not like there's going to be another Republican, I don't think, at this point. I don't even know if that's on the table at all, but I guess one way or another 2 terms, right?
Yeah.
At the most. So we're hopefully nearing the end, and worst case scenario, we're at the halfway point.
Yep.
And we're still here currently. So that's something. There we go. Our next question comes from Steve Dave, and they say, have you guys played the arcade version with actual cards? And you saw this comment, and then I was like, there's an arcade version with actual cards?
I've heard about it. I've seen pictures of it, and if I ever saw it, I would still play the heck out of it, just for the sake of playing it.
Oh, and also for the cards. That'd be a great collection piece.
Okay, so I was taking a look at it, and some people are selling the cards on eBay, and apparently there's a whole bunch of cards, and some of them are very hard to get. I don't need to go into that whole collecting thing again. I went down that rabbit hole a long time ago with comics, and
I think the actual collection part of it, I think the joy is the playing it and the earning it, right? Yeah. I think getting the rare ones, we don't care, and it's not like this bankrolls us enough to actually make it, but it would be sort of fun to be like, we played Injustice in an arcade, and, we're pretty good at it, lots of practice. Yeah. So here are the cards that we've got.
The problem really is, it's not so much the game itself, it's what I'd bring to it, and what I'd bring to it is my obsessive tendencies, and I would feel like I'd want to collect all of them even
once you started, yeah.
Yeah, so...
It's true, and there's no augments to earn for them, so it's just the cards.
Yeah, and, it's not like you get opportunities, it's not like it's on every corner and stuff, and it would be cheap to finish it, right? Like,
yeah.
When I read that there are sort of chase cards,
yeah.
I thought, that is, I mean, I'd love to play it. I collecting cards would not be for me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So there we go. We have not, but if we ever saw a cabinet out somewhere, we would definitely give it a shot. Which is weird to me. I don't know. It's strange that they have the actual physical cards.
Yeah.
I don't know. That it's interesting.
It's the same artwork. It's the same artwork as the cards in the game.
I'm sure it would actually be closer to the console version than it would be the mobile version, though, in terms of gameplay.
Yeah, I think it's like a Street Fighter 2 kind of game.
Yeah. It's interesting how it's sort of come full circle, right? Where you have now games that are released primarily for console that are getting a special arcade releases, right? Because that's very much the opposite of how it started.
Yes. I still believe that the best interface for that kind of fighting game is a Street Fighter one with 1 joystick and 6 buttons.
Yeah.
I will hold that till the day I die.
And I will say that the console fighting game that I've enjoyed the most personally is the original Soul Calibur.
Oh, on the console for sure. Yeah. But to me,
console.
the arcade is Street Fighter 2.
Yeah, so there we go.
Yeah.
Next question comes from John Davis, and they say, and there's 2 questions here.
It's
this
the same
is from,
question.
from our Phantom Zone video, yeah, 2, almost the same, different phrasing. And so first one, any idea who could replace Wonder Woman? And then a little more detail, BDCKR Gaming, got any idea who could switch with Wonder Woman in this team? Because I have her maxed, but I could V50 the others, thanks. So leave 5 level 50 the others.
So I think the answer is really anybody and no one. It's both answers at the same time. To get the full benefit in terms of being able to finish fights really quickly, if you want to do a bunch of life steal using LexCorp chest armor, you could use anybody. Anybody's got a decently powered special 2. You give them the same gear, you mow through everybody, and that'll satisfy. What Wonder Woman gives you that nobody else gives you is the power generation, so that you not only can rocket through the special tasks where you have to do, I think it's 195 specials.
Yeah.
You can also do anything that's related to doing specials, like doing the amount of damage over time, even if you need, like we do in this team, Aquaman to do it, or doing 120 damage over time effects, which is basically doing specials that have a damage over time effect on them, which is, again, Aquaman.
It's a twofer.
It's a twofer. And if you were to just swap out, say, LexCorp chest armor for Ibis stick, then you're really sort of loading up on the damage over time. Although I should point out, even though we're not doing here and we didn't do it in our speed run, it occurred to me afterwards that we could even make our speed team faster at handling damage over time stuff if we swapped out Claw of Horus for another damage over time gear on Aquaman, because then you get 2 damage over time effects. When they're stacked like that, it goes faster, so you don't have to sit and wait for the opponent to bleed out.
That's true.
And all you're giving up is Claw of Horus. So Claw of Horus is great if you're doing multiplayer and you don't want to lose, because if he's last man standing, you will crack the opponent open by stripping away his gears. But the number of times that you actually need it is small.
Yeah.
It does save you time sometimes when there's one guy left and they can't tag out and you rip away their gear, but it probably doesn't, on the balance, for the number of times that damage over time stuff shows up,
I think
you're probably faster.
It feels better more than it actually necessarily,
Right.
in a lot of games, makes a difference or particularly speeds it up.
Right. We've got a big stack of questions from Stelmari again. Do you want to do that after? You want to just jump right into it? You know what? Just to give other people a chance.
We've done 17, almost 18 minutes of non-Stel Mario questions.
Okay.
So we'll get into it and then maybe not spend quite as long. We're sort of motoring through this time. We're going at a brisk pace, so we'll see if we can keep that up. But Stel Mario's questions often give us long, rambling, jumping off points for us to just espouse random personal views. But so Stel Mario says, "Hello guys," and starts off saying, "I am honored to have my name being the big/only feature of today's Q&A." And that's just because of the quality of questions, I would say. There's a response from Season 7, Episode 6. We've sort of hashed similar stuff, right? This is just a continuation, which is for the Avengers discussion. They were originally better than the X-Men, as people didn't really like the original team with Cyclops, Beast, and Iceman, so they just reprinted old issues for a while. When the giant-sized X-Men with Colossus and Wolverine came on the scene, Claremont's writing and the characters on display were so much more dynamic and interesting, and his 15-year run is what put the X-Men above the Avengers, as they were selling more than Superman in their peak, and X-Men #1 is one of the highest-selling comics of all time. Obviously, that doesn't mean the Avengers aren't good comics, especially in the 2000s, with Avengers Disassembled and Bendis' New Avengers.
So a bunch of taking off points, actually. So Brian Michael Bendis, one of the best writers and prolific too. It's crazy. Remember Ultimate Spider-Man? Do you remember Ultimate Spider-Man?
That's one of the few comics that I've actually read, huh?
That was Brian Michael Bendis.
In your rush to get to the phone, time to turn it off before we dox somebody, we've lost headphones.
Yeah.
There we go. Okay.
So absolutely brilliant. But we're talking relatively modern, right? X-Men #1, sure, it was one of the high-selling comics of all time. The problem is, okay, so there was a whole thing in the 90s where they went into gimmicks. Comics, I think, as an industry, were, I don't know if they are now, because I'm not really as much, I'm not keeping as much up to date on it. They were catering to the same market and they weren't trying to attract new readers. So what you had were kids who grew up reading comics and collecting them, and by the time the 90s hit and they got to be adults, the industry was pushing comics and products to this group of people. So they would do gimmicks, like special foil covers, variant covers. And I believe X-Men #1 had a ton of variant covers where they had, I think, 4 different regular variant covers and then one special one that combined all 4 as a couple of gateways. So what was one big picture. And so you had, the X-Men were popular at the time. You had one of the most popular X-Men artists at the time, I believe, was Jim Lee. I got a cool story about Jim Lee, too. I met him at Dragon Lady comic store in back when he was only doing Punisher.
Yeah.
And Punisher War Journal, actually. And he'd just done the cover for one of the Ghost Rider Punisher crossovers. And there was nobody in the store. He was... I mean, it's not that he wasn't popular, but I guess he wasn't popular enough to attract the kind of crowds he would now if he showed up at a comic convention. So, anyways... so I don't know that it's... I know X-Men is popular. I don't know that X-Men #1 being one of the best sellers of all time is a good indicator of that. I think that was the way the market was headed, and it attracted a lot of speculators and people buying multiple copies. Whereas in the 70s and the 60s, where you had the real sort of golden and silver ages, you had just comics that would sell a lot and would have huge circulations that would reach a lot of people without having to rely on gimmicks.
Okay. So there we go.
And I also want to point out that the Giant Size X-Men, too, I mean, really, it was definitely Chris Claremont who brought a lot of energy to it, but it really was Wolverine. I mean, Wolverine's been one of the most popular Marvel characters for ages, and the fact that the Giant Size X-Men #1 introduced him was probably a big part of what drove the popularity of X-Men. I mean, again, you can't overlook Chris Claremont. You can't overlook the effect that John Byrne had when he did the whole Dark Phoenix saga with Chris Claremont. But it's I don't even remember what the point was. It was just that the Avengers, I guess, they had different kinds of appeal. Avengers, though, were at one point really, really popular. They weren't B tier. They weren't a B tier team at all.
Okay. Next part, which is with marathon runners, I think it would be the excessive heart strain that would be dangerous because it's an extreme level of exertion over and over. However, in regards to the same issue in strongman and bodybuilding, that issue is usually exacerbated by massive PED performance-enhancing drug use, especially in some of the best guys in the world for that sport. So much so that most of these guys have shortened their lifespan significantly for the sport, and one guy had a heart attack on stage.
Yeah, it's weird to me, right? Like, I mean, it's more obvious to me that strength training at the extremes are dangerous to you. It's not so obvious to me, even though it's true, that the endurance sports at the extremes are also dangerous the same way. Because you can say it's a big strain on the heart for marathon runners, but people who run marathons every once in a while, so they train a lot and they build up to like a peak activity every once in a while, they're not the same risk as people who run multiple marathons in a year. And I think it's that final activity that you're training for that's actually the most dangerous, because the training that people do to lead up to it can be, sure, yeah, but the volume isn't the same, and even if the volume were the same and you took the equivalent of a marathon and just spread it out over a few days, it's not as
well. Yeah, I mean, taking a marathon and spreading it over a very long period is basically just anybody who walks or jogs. Right?
That's true. I mean, there's a balance, right? At some point, if you spread a marathon out over a year, then you got
it's not a lot of activity.
But then if you do 5 or 6 marathons a year, you've trained your body to a level of performance that is more extreme and higher than most people will ever achieve.
Yeah.
But you're doing stuff to your body that's dangerous. Yeah.
For sure. Next part is, I think the breakthrough is essentially useless for golds as it screws up matchmaking if you're running elite 8s. Of course, with silvers like Regime Green Lantern, it makes a lot of sense to do so because of the way the stats would stack up.
That's interesting too, because I think, I'll tell you what, so we're playing elite 5 cards, right?
Yeah.
And I should pay attention a little bit more, but I think in the later stages of an ultimate, we're facing some. There we go. We got a team
elite
full
10
of
level
elite
60s.
10s. Right. And they're not the cheap ones, right? These are the later game ones that have high stats. I I don't know. I mean, so
Yeah, screws up matchmaking is an interesting term, because I think that the matchmaking actually is pretty good no matter what. And I think we actually, one of the questions later, right, gets into this a little bit. Maybe let me see if I can.
So let's bring it up. Let's answer that now, because it's related.
Norris Kasempa says, is there a reason you keep your character promotions at 5 and not 7? And then Why So Serious replied, and then said, it's because they don't want to get matched up against harder opponents. And that's not really why, because as you can see here, like we just mentioned, there's Elite 10 level 60s.
Right, because the only fight where you're facing characters that are sort of your own when you're not maxed out yourself is maybe the first or second fight.
Yeah, and so...
It's really avoiding Astro Harness.
Yeah, because there's different stuff that when you run into it really slows your fight down, right?
Yeah.
And it's people that can, stall out the fight for, 15 seconds? Just by themselves.
Yeah.
It's also potentially having your crits get removed, right? Like why Red Sun Green Lantern is so hard to play against.
But he's not even that
or
high.
Was at least previously.
So his stats aren't high enough so that if we were all Elite 10, level 60, we would hardly ever face him.
If they were also fully breakthrough? Yeah, I guess so.
Because we'd be facing higher stat guys.
Yeah, that's true.
Red Sun Green Lantern is one of the earlier challenge golds, so his stats aren't that high.
So we don't actually end up getting that benefit. But so it really is just mostly Astro Harness, isn't it, at that level of play?
Yeah,
is there anybody else that really slows the fight down a lot?
Maybe Blackest Night Flash?
If you're geared up wrong, potentially
If you're
Killer
geared
Frost.
for damage over time. Oh, yeah, I guess, I guess so. I mean, the what changes things is Tantutonem doesn't care whether Killer Frost is around.
That's true.
And Flashpoint Batman does a huge amount of basic damage.
Mm-hmm.
Like, just a disproportionate amount. He's come as close as possible to making a basic damage attack irrelevant again. That and Batman Ninja Catwoman.
Yeah.
So maybe what you'll do is you'll face more, when you're higher, you'll face more of the hacked metal teams.
That's true.
But out of all the metal teams, the only person that bothers me is Catwoman.
Mm.
And if we're high enough, that our stats are high enough that we can match up against her, because we face her now. It's not like we don't see her. If anything, so a team like this where Arkham Knight Batgirl could come in. I was going to say Batwoman, but it's not Batwoman. Arkham Knight Batgirl comes in and saves her teammate. That can slow down a fight too, and that actually takes a little bit more sort of resource management strategy as far as deciding maybe we try to knock out her first teammate with Batman, so that when Arkham Knight Batgirl tags in, we can still, like this. So we've got she can't stun us, so she doesn't get the boosted damage, even if she does hit us a few times. Oh, look, she's bleeding through. Oh, shoot. That was a bit of a mistake. But she's, and you don't face that. So if anything, you actually get more interesting teams too, if you don't try to max it out. Because once you get too high, there's a limited number of possibilities of teams that can actually match up properly against you, where they can start pushing the threat level towards the end of the ultimate battles. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we've been playing long enough. We're not looking for long fights. It might have been interesting and fun earlier, although I've got some footage of a Batman Ninja Catwoman team where it lasts forever because they are invulnerable and she can heal herself. So we keep on healing herself. And doing special twos and just getting her passive again. And it's funny. And the problem was that the video cut out because the recorder limits it to 45 minutes. Mm-hmm. So I thought...
So you have a 45-minute long video?
I thought I was actually recording an hour-long video because I thought an hour would be a nice round number. But yeah, I've got footage of...
And you played 15 minits in an unwinnable fight for content and you didn't even get it.
I thought it would make good like B-roll, which would be funny.
That's so sad.
Yeah, I know. And I happened to be at that moment when I was stuck in that fight. I had the chance to just play. Nothing better to do.
Okay, so there we go. Next chunk. It is extremely difficult to max cards unless you don't level them beforehand. And if you wanted to max an Elite 7 level 50 from no/minimal augments, it would take ages.
Only if you're relying them to do the work. I mean, for the longest time, we had a bunch of teams where two of them were enough to drag somebody else through, and that's what we did with our bronzes. So in order to get our bronzes up to level 50, we used to just have them tag on, have a two-man team that was good enough to finish the high fights, the higher level fights, and then that. But that the point is well taken, right? Because the experience you get is maxed out when you are facing a equal or higher
greater,
level.
yeah.
Yeah.
So it makes sense to have people able to fight up, right? Punch up, basically.
Right. And when you're facing their elite 60, then level 60, you're facing elite 10s.
Yeah.
Then it's harder to have a team that is just the two that's going to be able to manage it.
Although it's been a while since we've had to deal with XP and leveling.
Yeah, because right now, when we realized that the 60-10 was cool in theory, but in practice was not that much fun. Once we realized that was the case, we didn't waste a lot of time trying to level up everybody. 50 was enough for us.
Mm-hmm. Next part, I definitely say that this pandemic is going to have a major effect on a movie-going audience and will be a shock to the system. And I think for sure, I think there's going to be a ton of stuff that is going to be changed, and it's really just a question of how much of this is going to be short-term and how much of this is long-term, right?
Yeah.
Where you can imagine, I think the people who are already sort of movie fans, right? Coming out of this will... right after this ends, I think there's going to be an uptick in movies. But the thing about it is, I think the way, even when I think about it, and I know this is wrong, is sort of reaching an endpoint and then it's done, which is not really how this is going to work, right? There's going to be a point where things open up more, but these activities are still going to be dangerous, so there's going to be sort of a much longer tail in terms of what is and isn't acceptable in terms of actions, right? And the way that I'm imagining it, where it's like it's over, there's an announcement, and they say, congratulations, it's done, we're done, everybody do as much socialization as you want, right? That's not how it's going to work.
Nope.
Yeah, so I don't even, when stuff starts to open up, how people are going to do movie theaters, what they're going to do to keep, from other outbreaks getting started from people packing into a movie theater again, right, is interesting. Like, I don't know how that's going to actually be handled, and I think a lot of stuff is still totally up in the air.
Well, the key word, it's unprecedented. This is something we've never seen before. Something similar to this hasn't happened for 100 years. Yeah. And the response to it, I think, hasn't happened even longer than that. Like, I don't even remember in all the readings I've done about the 1918 flu epidemic, pandemic, whether there was this broad, widespread implementation of strategies to minimize the effect. I think it wasn't possible because the whole reason that the 1918 flu got the name Spanish flu was one... Well, I was going to say racism, but it's not really. I mean, although at the time I think Spanish people were not considered white.
Yeah.
But it's really that it was in the middle of a war, and all the countries that were involved in the war spent a lot of time censoring information. Spain was not involved, so they were the only ones that were willing to actually talk about it, so they got blamed for it when, in fact, most historians agree that it started in Kansas.
Yeah, we've already talked about this.
Did we?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, so it's funny to me, right? So, anyways, the point being that it's unprecedented, so we can all make predictions about what will happen, and some of them will be true, but I don't think it'll be based on any kind of real knowledge. It'll be based on getting lucky with your guess.
Yeah, it's definitely, I think what this is going to do for sure, to at least some extent, is with the releases from home, it's going to give studios a sense of exactly what and how much value the theater actually provides, right? Yeah. And I think there are some experiences that are definitely still better suited to being seen in theaters, right? Like, I've heard the movie Gemini Man, the Will Smith one.
Right.
With the whole special high frame rate and really high resolution, was really worth seeing in theaters. I think it was something like 120 or more frames per second or something like that, where it was supposed to be really ridiculous, and it was to the point where they literally had to actually do
something to make it look worse.
No, they didn't have to do something to make it look worse. They actually had to, for the fight choreography, use CGI and use editing to make the fight choreography sharper, because there were so many frames per second that normally you can throw a punch and have it not connect and have the other person react and have it look smooth at 24 frames per second. But when you show it at 120 frames per second,
bigger gaps.
you can literally notice the time difference between somebody landing a punch and reacting to it. So they actually had a bunch of other considerations where things that normally are sort of fuzzy, right? Where all you need to do is have 1/24th of a second be that same gap where they both do the thing, right? Where one person pretends that the punch lands and the other person pretends to get hit. Whereas you need 1/120th of a second is a lot narrow of a margin, and they found that people could actually tell better.
I didn't even realize that our brains were able to process things that fast.
Well, I'm not even 100%. Our brains can definitely process things that fast. It's more of a question of the way that our processing works, whether or not we perceive that level of detail. And evidently they thought it was worth enough to put that extra time and money into doing it because it subconsciously looked off to people. It's the same way where when somebody moves for real versus computer generated, you can't imagine that the muscle systems underneath it, we can't see that, but they have to render the skeleton and then the muscle systems on the skeleton, and then like the flesh on top of that, or then like the skin on top of that, and then if there's like hair, right, like the hair on top of that, like for like animals, for example, right? And you wouldn't think that it matters, but we've spent so much time looking at it that whether or not we understand on a sort of perceptual level, whether you understand that on a conscious level, that something's wrong, we understand on a fundamental level subconsciously because we've spent so much time looking at it, right? Where I guess I'm not 100% sure for Gemini Man, but evidently it was worth doing. But they did a ton of stuff for that movie.
Okay, so then now I wasn't interested in seeing it. I am interested in seeing Gemini Man.
Apparently that's like an in theaters experience, and it's not in theaters anymore, right? Because we don't. You need a TV that can display it at that height of frame rate too.
What does this computer do?
How many hertz? I don't know.
Yeah, I think this might be 120 hertz.
Maybe. So then that might be an option.
All
but
right.
it's interesting, right?
Yeah,
There's a whole thing with fidelity,
right?
And how important it is, and the idea of future proofing it and whatever. But what I've seen actually, which it never really made sense to me, why like the whole 4K and 8K, right? When I have a 24-inch monitor, that's 1080, and I don't notice. It's not blurry. I can have an incredibly sharp image display on that. But I saw something which made a lot of sense to me, which is
it's a distance.
I forget where it was. Sorry?
But more important is the distance you watch it from, right?
A lot of movie theater screens can be displayed in 1080p, and it's fine. It's fine resolution.
Sure. Yeah.
So it's not even that we're going to be watching it bigger than that,
Right.
What it is it's future-proofed, and it also lets you do a lot of stuff within the shot. And that makes sense to me for professionals. They said what you can actually do is you can, well, first off, color sampling is better. So when you downscale it, you end up, instead of pixels that are either one color or another from a single sample, if you have it displayed in downsize, then each pixel is the average of the colors of way more pixels. So there's a lot more color samples in the image, so it's a lot more smooth looking.
Right. Even so when your textures is what you're getting at, isn't it?
Yeah. Like so it's smoother gradients, between colors for textures.
Right.
Yeah, so that's a lot better. But the other thing, which I didn't realize, is if you're doing digital stuff in it afterwards, so if you're framing it or cropping it, right, you can crop an image down a lot from 4K and still have it display at full resolution.
Right.
So you can do a lot of virtual camera stuff within it, right, where you can add, for example, virtual camera shake. You can remove virtual camera shake without losing as much of the edges of the image. You can do a lot of stuff in that terms. And when I thought about it like that, it made a lot more sense to me as a pre-final product tool, as opposed to something that actually you see in the consumer end.
Right.
Yeah, because as a consumer, I've looked at varying resolutions, and you don't notice a huge difference. Right. But that to me made sense, and I don't know where I heard that from. It's definitely not me. I want to say it's probably somebody like Captain Disillusion or something like that. And even if it wasn't, that's a person worth checking out if you're interested in that kind of stuff anyways. But, who knows? I'm stealing that from somebody, and it might be wrong, and I have no expertise, so don't take anything that I just said as a primary source, I guess. I'm disavowing it as I say it.
A few other questions even after Stelmaria, but we might be running out of time, so maybe we'll just finish off Stelmaria's?
Yeah, for sure. So, next chunk is responding to what we were talking about for social workers. And care home staff, which is, or not social workers. Social workers not the right term.
Personal support workers.
Personal support workers. There we go. I'm totally
staff.
blank. Frontline personal support workers. Yeah. So there's a major issue with care home staff because they have even less access to PPE while working in an area with a high risk of infection, because social distancing in that kind of situation is nearly impossible.
Yeah. So here's the thing. I mean, Ontario has passed legislation to ban personal support workers and frontline healthcare workers from working at more than one long-term care facility.
Mm-hmm.
And they've encouraged employers to offer full-time work, which is kind of stupid. And I mean, the idea is not bad in terms of preventing spread, But why it's stupid is what you're doing is you're legislating against the most vulnerable people.
Yeah.
And what you're doing is you're letting people who've been exploiting them continue to exploit them. British Columbia did a better job.
The idea of encouraging people
Right.
as a government saying, I think you should do this, that means nothing.
Yeah. So BC ordered facilities to hire everybody full-time, required them to have the same wages as those who are part of a collective bargaining unit. So what it gave you the same effect, but you actually held accountable the people who were responsible for the problem in the first place, which are the employers who were not giving full-time hours to the workers that they had so they could avoid the cost of benefits and providing benefits. So that's, I think, a good example of how there's answers to be had, but if you target the wrong people, you're not actually fixing the fundamental problem.
And I just think it's really sort of confusing when the government just encourages people to do something, right? I don't know. I mean, it's
meaningless.
It does. Yeah, there's no. I mean, it's not effective.
It's like a rule with no consequence.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And people already break laws frequently, right? Corporations already break laws frequently.
Yes.
And just pay the fines and whatever. But when it's just an encouragement, when there's literally no potential cost incurred, there's no risk for not doing it. And you would ideally, it's a good thing to do that they're encouraging people to do. But the fact that the government is saying it specifically, Justin Trudeau might as well just say it personally.
Yeah, because when you have the power to actually enforce it, and instead of enforcing, you say, well, you should do this.
Yeah.
Then it's definitely a wrong message, as opposed to people who are not in power who are saying, yeah, you really should do this, right? It's just, I think it's a bad thing. Mm-hmm. More not because it's a bad thing to do, but more because what they could have done instead, an opportunity cost.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So there we go. We're out of time, and we're not out of questions, but we'll, I guess, shuffle these along, see the ones that stay fresh, and we'll put them in the fridge and pull them out next week.
Very good.
Next Tuesday. So finishing up here, we've got some things to say, people to thank. So a quick shout out to Eliza. It's essentially a service, Caton. She is still working to produce boutique soap and skincare products because I guess that's an essential service in Ontario. Or if, her boss wants to continue to sell them to make that bank. This shout out has been brought to you by Essential Oils. Essential Oils. They smell good. And we'd also like to give a huge thank you to everybody who is supporting us on Patreon.
And that is Consul Peasant and Edwoon, who are supporting us at the highest tier last word. Mohammed Albshaiti, supporting us at the Your Message Here tier. Shawn, Farrell, Daniel Simonson, Aaron Maule, Michael DeVries, and Brandon C., who are supporting us on the credited level. And Chris Wolf and Scarlett Enby at the gratitude level.
There we go. Thanks so much for your support, and we'll see you next time. Komoda.